an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club, childhood favorites, covering Johnny Tremain. Story about a boy that's kind of a dick. I forgot how much a dick he was when I read this as a child. And also it's about to get political up in this bitch, so be ready. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am doing this today with my wonderful friends from Overdue. I'm Natasha. Gentlemen, take it away.
Oh, hey, I'm Craig.
And I'm Andrew.
Yay!
That's us. We're those guys.
Thank you guys so much for coming back. I'm excited to record with you again because last time was really fun.
Yeah, we had a great time.
I think this is a better book than last time. So, you know.
Took less time to read, that's for sure.
That's definitely for sure. The thing...
That's true.
The book you're referring to, so we talked about Bag of Bones by Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And I had forgot... I'm just having flashbacks now to how much of that book was not set in that small town in Maine before things started happening.
Oh yeah, right. Because he just was Stephen King for a while, and then and then the book got started.
Yeah, there's just a half a book of him fighting with his publisher.
Oh yeah,
which is supposed to be interesting for some
riveting
reason.
Stuff. None of that in Johnny Tremain.
No,
it's mostly fanfic about the Revolutionary War.
It is a bit of a it's like a Revolutionary War. Like, what is there a male version of Mary suing? That like Harry
Marty Sue.
Marty suing. That like, what if we just plugged a boy that wasn't real into history? Now, plenty of people have done that, but the ways in which this story does it, I think, are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have read this, Natasha, right?
I'm sorry, I'm stuck on Harry Bluing.
Harry Bluing.
Yeah, I read this as a kid a few times, and really loved it. Mm-hmm. Was a book nerd as a kid, and I liked things that were either British, like children's literature, or set in Britain, or in this version, there are lots of British characters. That's enough for me, I guess. And I just don't think I was ready when I came back to it for, like I said, Johnny Tremain's kind of an asshole, and also she's way more nuanced with like depicting the various sides of everything than I expected. I thought it was going to be like, oh, remember the Redcoats? They're horrible people. And there's a scene with a pretty brutal attack on a Tory in the street. Mm-hmm. And the Whigs are obviously like the revolutionaries. And I didn't remember that at all, that she's like willing to portray them as being a little bloodthirsty and like in an unnecessary way at times.
Right, yeah, and at the same time, Johnny has some like pals at the stables who like hang out with them and give him work and like teach him how to horse sometimes.
Yep.
Indeed, yes.
And there's
that's one of my skills on my resume is horsing.
There's that one bit toward the end. Let's just jump right to the end of the book where everybody's fighting already. But that thing where he passes like Lieutenant Stranger or whatever his name is, and is like,
I think his name is actual Lieutenant Stranger. I think that might be his name.
A couple days ago we might have been friends, but now if I go over and try and make sure he's okay, like he'll probably have me shot for helping out the Sons of Liberty or whatever it is. So yeah, where do we want to start? Like, I have a lot of facts about Esther Forbes, who wrote the book.
Yeah, what do you got?
Yeah, normally in my intro, I'm like, this is the book by so-and-so, and I did not do that this time. So thanks for, like, giving her credit.
It's okay.
That I did not do.
Everybody knows.
Let me have another glass of wine over here.
So she was born in 1891 and she died in 1967. She was a novelist and a historian, and she won both the Newbery Medal for Johnny Tremain and then the Pulitzer Prize for History for her book. It's an autobiography. Paul Revere it's one of the kinds of biography. Paul Revere and the world
traveled through time and inhabited Paul Revere's body and then wrote a book.
It's called Paul Revere and the World He Lived In, and it's about Paul Revere and the world that he lived in. It was published in 1942. And yeah, I guess apparently one of her great uncles was Sam Adams. I don't know if she can back that up or if she just it's like telling people that you have an uncle who works at Nintendo, but that's what
how
she
I
says.
get all the games early.
Yeah.
I love that's the comparison that you went to.
That's just
like,
that's where my brain
just
lives.
Really?
Yeah.
I dated someone in high school who claimed to have been babysat by the Pink Power Ranger. The actress, not the Power Ranger.
Oh, that's too bad.
But I don't.
Well,
again,
that's interesting now.
Unverified claims. Though I do think, Andrew, something that makes me think that might be real. She was in 1960, I think, inducted into the American Antiquarian Society,
right?
Which was actually founded in 1812 by like a bunch of those guys, and it's gone on to like mostly preserve a lot of printing history, like documents and stuff from pre-20th century, like what we'd call British North America, I suppose.
At first it just sounded like a really polite way to say an old folks home.
Yes.
An antiquarian society. No, Grandma, it's not like the other places. I swear. They have books.
So yeah, what else do I... What do you got,
what do you have? Do you want to talk for a while? Because I can keep going, but
I'll talk for a little bit. I'll say that she started working at Houghton Mifflin in Massachusetts before she moved to New York to write her novels. Her first published novel, "Oh Genteel Lady,"
exclamation point,
excuse me.
I love the exclamation points.
Published in 1926, it was the second ever book of the month from the Book of the Month Club, which does exist here in the year of our Lord 2018. So that's kind of neat.
That's pretty wild.
It's like I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, it's like Blue Apron, but books, I guess.
A better way to book.
She spent a couple years after she moved to New York. She spent some time in the 30s back in Massachusetts, actually living with her family after she had divorced her husband. And was like writing these historical fiction novels. So like I read one account, I think it might have been in the forward of Johnny Tremain, where they were like, oh, the reason she was so good at Johnny Tremain was because she won a Pulitzer for history. And that might be true, but also she wrote like 3 historical fiction books set in that period of Massachusetts.
Yeah, like her second, of her early books, the most famous one and the one that I think is still in print is called A Mirror for Witches, which is about the Salem witch trials. And then, the Paul Revere book and this one are her 3 big ones. But
I came across one called The General's Lady, which is about a real woman.
Exclamation point?
No, I wish. The exclamation point is in the middle. The General's Lady is based on the true story of Bathsheba Spooner, who...
That is a name.
...was the first woman ever hanged in Worcester, Mass., and was part of the first capital case of the United States because she hired 2 former British soldiers to kill her husband so that she could be with her lover, who did not kill her husband when she asked him to.
This lady sounds rad. Why is there not a movie about her?
I think there is stuff about her, so you could go look her up. It seems she was pregnant with her lover's child, and it seems like they sped up the trial because she was working with British, like, former prisoners of war, so there was like an anti-loyalist sentiment.
Sure.
Look up Bathsheba Spooner, I suppose.
You don't name your kid that and don't expect her to be hanged for like attempted murder. Come on. That's just what's gonna happen.
Shout out to all the Bathshebas out there. I think
it's just good to celebrate historic firsts, you know? You hang it from that glass ceiling.
There is an introduction in my copy of Johnny Tremain.
Yeah.
That I thought was hilarious because I had no idea this was even allowed. But it says there was more that made the book unlikely. As a writer, Forbes faced enormous struggles. She had to work her way through dyslexia. She rarely spelled a word the same way twice. Her punctuation was a series of dashes, and that's it. And her temperament would have driven most editors to tears. She refused to accept suggested changes to her story. She refused to clean up the manuscript with proper punctuation. And she refused to even bother with standard English spelling.
Boy, sounds like a writer to me. I don't know.
No, the M dash and the page break are on purpose. Mm-hmm. Don't tell me otherwise.
Did you guys have in your copy, was the dialogue all with like single quotes instead of double quotes?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were a couple that I actually thought were like not purposefully unclosed. Like there were a couple that would like it would close for a character doing something and then it would just start being dialogue again. Which I guess I'd chalk it up to this because if you also noticed it, and I don't know, because I was reading it on a Kindle, and maybe it's just that edition, but I presume that that's probably how it is. That happens sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't clock it while I was reading it, but now that you mention it, yeah, that's my copy as well.
There were a couple scenes where like I would lose track of who was speaking occasionally because I couldn't. I don't know if it's just because I'm so trained to double quotations, which I think is what you're getting at, Natasha, but I definitely, how she navigated in and out of like one character speaking for a long time would sometimes lose me a little bit.
Yeah, it was weird. Like I didn't actually notice until I was halfway through the book. So it seemed to be fine. And then I think, Craig, what you're talking about where it like either ended and then something else started without a quote at the start or vice versa. And that was when I stopped and was like, wait a minute, is he repeating what somebody else said to someone? And then I looked at previous pages and I was like, it's been like that this whole time. I just didn't even see it.
There's also, and this we'll hit this, I guess, in the sequence of the plot, but there's a period of the later part of the book where Johnny is like thinking about who he is and like where he comes from and deciding who he's going to be. And it was hard for me to tell if he was thinking in his head or if he was saying words out loud. Because, like, in the action of the scenes, he's, like, in the room with his, like, sort of sister, sort of love interest. And
right.
He's saying things that he has thought out loud, or he has thought, like, quietly to himself, but they're in quotations. And I think a modern printing convention would maybe push the author to, like, put that in italics if it's in the person's head or something like that. So yeah, this was written when? This was written in 40.
It came out in 43.
So the other thing.
Oh, wait, no, 42. She won an award in 43.
Okay. The thing I also want to bring up from the forward, which I'm glad you brought up, Natasha, was the whole like this was published during World War II, and it's like consider this as a reading it as a young adult while your nation is fighting the largest war in the history of the universe.
Yeah.
And actually, what that means for like a rah-rah American thing that, as you point out, though, isn't at times is very rah-rah, and we should probably poke some holes in some of it, but is also a little nuanced in terms of like how a community deals with starting a war.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually 43.
Okay.
My notes were right, and then they were wrong.
I think the 42, 43 thing was the Paul Revere book.
Yes, yeah, you're right. You're right.
But yeah,
I think like it's like there's a rawness to it, but it's like it's about just war. It's about why people fight in a giant war, which I guess would have been relevant to to people at the time. Like, there's this guy, James Otis, who is not like always lucid because he got like hit in the head with the butt of a gun or something, I think.
Yeah.
And he's saying, you know, we give all we have, lives, property, safety, skills. We fight, we die for a simple thing, only that a man can stand up. And that's like the quote from the book. That's like the heart of the book is like, here's, you know, a lot of people are going to die and give up a lot of stuff, but future generations will be better off because of it. So like, here's your gun. Good luck.
I feel bad because, like, Andrew's saying this really serious thing about, like, we're fighting for real things, and Craig, since he's on camera, is doing something wild, and I'm cracking up underneath Andrew's very serious monologue.
I think so that a man can stand up, and it just has this, like, and I'm swinging my arm is what I'm doing. I got my elbow at a 90-degree angle, and I'm just swinging my arm. Like, a man can stand up.
And there's like an American flag just waving behind me.
Yeah, and it's like, so if that's the message of the book, and like reading in the 21st century, I'm certainly very aware of who the book doesn't care about standing up.
Anyone who's not a man.
I don't know what you mean, Craig. Can you elaborate on that?
So we're gonna, after we complain a little bit more about the book, I think we'll get into the plot. But the big thing in that James Otis speech that you're alluding to, Andrew, is he goes through like, oh, and the French won't have to deal with their children being run over by royal people, and the Spanish will throw off their yokes, and everyone from Europe, every man in Europe will get to stand up because we did a good job.
All those oppressed men.
Right.
And there's no mention of the literal enslaved people that we see in this book, which are included, or the rest of the colonies at that time. And I don't know where we are in the history of, like, I guess Britain hasn't outlawed slavery yet. Like, because if it's still in the colonies, so we're before that, because I know Britain got rid of it before we did. So, yeah, or like, you know, women, or there's just a lot of not standing up for people. But I guess from a why, because it is like it's written for a younger audience. It has a teen as a main character. It has this kind of like pretty easily digestible point, which is that you're gonna fight, you're gonna give up something. I think you pointed that out too, Andrew. You're gonna each give up a part of yourself that is part of what you have to offer the world to fight for other men and inspire them. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna I do want to get into the plot. I really do. I swear. I will. But
there's not too much of it. We'll be okay.
I want to address, because, you know, I'm gonna talk current events a little bit.
Uh-oh.
But there have been a lot of protests and things that have been criticized for being either violent or people being open to the suggestion of violence in retaliation for having their human rights trampled upon. And there have been a couple of instances where property has been damaged, and there's all kinds of blowback to that, and people claiming that this isn't the right way to protest and that this isn't acceptable. It's not the American way. And reading this, I could not stop laughing, because do they know what happened, or is it just what kind of history were these people taught? Because that's how everything began, was bashing the windows of people's shops in, taking their stuff and throwing it in the harbor. And they were careful to only destroy the very thing that they were protesting against, specifically in the scene of the Boston Tea Party. Nevertheless, that's thousands of dollars worth of property that has been destroyed. And we celebrate that. That's something that we take pride in as Americans, that we did this. Mm-hmm. But, you know, they were white, so it was fine.
They were white dudes in the 1770s.
Yeah, and
dressed as Indians.
Cool. Super great. And then
we won't talk about that.
Speaking weird, bad, old Walt Disney cartoon Indian speak, like whatever horrible thing you want to call it.
Yep.
But yeah, it's an interesting point because like the version of that we get, I think, in like school is the sanitized sort of noble version. Like, oh, if we just gotten representation in exchange for our tax money, then then it would have been fine. But like people in Washington D.C. who pay taxes without having representation in Congress, like they're not burning down a Starbucks or anything to like protest.
Right. and yet you're seeing like contemporary state legislatures try to like pass laws that like you are liable for, the police pay or whatever, like if you break a single like pane of glass, like you're liable for all the police pay that was put in during a protest or something like that. It's like all of the stuff that happened when in the first, I think like around the very first Women's March in DC, a lot of those folks have actually, I think, been cleared in court, but they were like maybe
I think it all got thrown out. Yeah,
I think it all got thrown out. Yeah. But a lot of that was based on what you're saying, Natasha, which is like property damage and taxpayer money wasted. It's like, shut up.
Right.
Our country was founded on this.
I totally respect the like no taxation without representation. I understand where they're coming from, but there were times where I just like felt a little eye rolly because what they were getting so angry about felt so minor in comparison to what people are still fighting for now, and yet that's not considered enough to warrant the reaction that they're having to how they're being treated. That's
an interesting point because the book does take pains when we approach the Tea Party stuff, that it's like, oh, it's just this tiny little tax that for the most part people aren't even going to notice in their pocketbook, but because of the taxation without representation thing, which is also attributed to James Otis, then we have to make a stand and do something about it. But like if you zoom out into history, and the book does allude to it, but it's not part of the events of the book, like the Boston Massacre happened 3 years before the events in this book, and that was actually more akin to what we're seeing today, where like you yell at government officials in the street because they're committing heinous crimes, and so they like all yelled at a British dude and then they got shot for it. Right. So it's been over 200 years and it's all the same, but we are pretending it's different.
Yeah. And it's like this kind of protest, like it doesn't only happen for this reason, but I think it happens more often when people feel like the system, like there's no way for them to be heard via the system. Like the system isn't listening to them anymore, which is what happens when people win elected office with 51% or less of the vote and then go in and do 100% of things that you don't like, that you don't like. Like, of course they have to make calls or whatever, but,
I like the phrase 100% of the things I don't like. It's a good way to think about it.
So they get in there they get in there with 51% and they act like they have got a sweeping mandate to do like literally whatever they want, like regardless of what their constituents want. And then there are other systemic things going on, like districting and like voter ID and voter suppression stuff, and yeah, like people look at the government we have now, and this is like the highest I'll climb up on the political soapbox, I think. But people look at the government we have now, and it's like it's a minority, like it's somebody who did not win the popular vote, backed up by like a Congress that did not win the popular vote, like that is just representing fewer people but have more like power because of how the system works. Like, yeah, no wonder they're like tearing down Silent Sam or whatever. Like they don't have any other like lever of power to pool. And that's especially true in North Carolina, where the Republican legislature there has just like completely stripped as many of the powers away from the Democratic governor as they possibly can. Like, it's just, of course, people are upset.
The language of the unheard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about our boy Johnny Tremain
Cheers.
and his hands?
Yeah, cheers, everybody. So there's this guy, Johnny Tremain, who does silver.
So I will. So we've talked about Esther Forbes. We've yelled about the government, and I think that actually, like, what I remember about the story of this book, because I don't think I was assigned to read it. I think I probably fell asleep when we watched the movie in elementary school.
I never even knew there was a movie until like 2 days ago.
Yeah, Walt Disney's daughter is in it for like a hot second.
Wow.
But I mostly knew that this was a book about a kid whose hand got messed up and that it was set in the 1700s. I did not remember that there was a Revolutionary War fanfic element going on.
That's like the whole thing. What are you
doing? I thought it was mostly about like a sad apprentice boy who got his life ruined. So Andrew, would you like to correct the record at the top of the book for me? Want to tell me who this boy is?
I think Natasha should do it because I just talked a whole lot.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Self-conscious about it.
You know what? I'm really happy to introduce him because I feel so deeply that Johnny Tremain is 100% correct to be as horribly prideful as he is, that I resent what happens to him right up until the end of this book, and I do not forgive Esther for doing this to him.
Oh, no. I like the idea that she inflicted this book on Johnny Tremain.
She could have done anything
it's interesting because
yeah.
He's at her mercy. And this is what you do, Esther? Come on. But I remembered it differently from reading it as a kid. I thought that what happened to Johnny's hand happened completely because of what Dove does as his like little practical joke, and it turns out that's not exactly true. So I had to rethink some of how I felt about this. But Johnny Tremain is an apprentice in the Laphams. Is that how we want to say that?
Yeah, let's say Laphams.
In the Lapham silversmith shop, and Mr. Lapham is really talented, but aging and not keeping up with things the way that he used to. Andrew, what are you doing in the chat?
Just engaging the audience,
Just putting hands in the chat.
Oh God. But he has 3 apprentice boys, which we find out later is kind of like not necessary. He really doesn't need 3 dudes.
Nope.
But he does have them. And Johnny is by far the most talented out of the 3. He is the whole package. This is why I got so mad. It's not just that he's talented. He's also a good manager where he's on people and knows what needs doing. He's checking the inventory of coal. Do we need more coal? Do we need to order more? When there's an order being placed, he's in the background, low-key writing it down because he knows Mr. Lapham doesn't write that shit down so people get the wrong order. Bare minimum shit here, people. We're not asking a lot. You order something, you want to get what you ordered, and Johnny is ensuring that this happens. But he has to do it off in the background because Mr. Lapham will get offended about how there's this apprentice. Maybe just do your job. Maybe just do your job, and he doesn't have to be this guy.
So the jerkos working with Johnny Tremain are Dove.
Thank you for taking over.
No, it's good.
Are Dove, who you alluded to earlier, and in my notes I put Dove and somebody, and I looked up his name later. His name's Dusty, but he doesn't matter.
Correct. Dusty's real young, though.
Yeah, and Dove is older than Johnny Tremain and resents how good Johnny Tremain is at silversmithing and how he carries himself, to the point where sometimes he goes up to Dusty in a corner and is like, yo, I'm going to stab Johnny with some scissors. Like, he literally says that to Dusty sometimes. But Forbes, and this is where you and Forbes part ways, Natasha, I think. Forbes is like very careful to be like, hey, if Johnny weren't so stuck up and proud, he could have been friends with Dove. He could have recognized.
Why would you want to be friends with Dove, though?
Dove, yeah, like, pardon my language, but Dove seems like a real crumb bum.
Andrew, look, I didn't want to do this on the air, but I don't accept that kind of language on my show, and I'll thank you to take it outside.
I take it back.
Yeah, you gotta call him a real ass butt. That's what he is.
Yeah. That's it. I just Dove doesn't have any redeeming features. We go the whole book and he doesn't grow as a person at all.
No, that's kind of the thing. Is like, and Forbes keeps being like, Johnny realizes that. Johnny realizes that Dove is morally and emotionally stunted and could use someone to take care of him. And that he's ultimately very weak, whereas I think their initial relationship, Johnny always sees him as a rival that needs to be, like, beaten.
That is one thing I really liked about the book, is that we see Johnny grow from, like, 13 or 14 to 16. Is that the rough span of time?
He's like 15 or 16 by the end of the book.
Yeah, he's definitely 16. He's 16 by the end. But yeah, there are a couple of moments where he looks at Dove and thinks about him in a different way. He looks at like a shirt that his dead mom made
that was
him.
A really touching scene.
Yeah, and he just he realizes that he is now old enough to like understand what the stuff means and like put himself in other people's shoes a little bit more. And I thought that was an interesting way to show like his progression as a character and his like maturity.
Yes.
Meanwhile, a full-grown adult, I'm like, yeah, all right, 14-year-old Johnny, you get him.
So like everyone knows that he's super proud and arrogant. Like, so the Laphams, Grandpa Lapham and his wife and their daughters Dorcas and Madge, and someone's daughters Isana and Scylla. As I said before, Johnny is gonna marry Scylla when he grows up, but right now it's a weird sister relationship.
And Mrs. Lapham isn't Mr. Lapham's wife.
Oh,
she's his daughter-in-law.
Oh, okay, that helps me out a lot. Yeah. Actually, makes sense of what's going on. They all like how useful he is, but always kind of give him shit for how Johnny he is. Like, it's like Johnny good as gold, they call him, or something like that at one point.
Yeah, there's a section where they have to read from the Bible, and from the book, Mr. Lapham's selections for his boys were sometimes designed to point out some fault in a member of his household, especially in the reader. Dove was always being asked to read about sluggards and going to ants. And then Johnny's section is, turn to Proverbs 11, second verse, when pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. Proverbs 16, 18th, pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. So, like, hey, Johnny, pride goeth before the fall, my dude.
Yeah, he literally says, like, hey, Johnny, do you think God would like you? And Johnny goes, not especially.
But then there's like later, okay, I'm going to read this. He decided to do nothing that would lay him open to such criticism for at least a morning, but he couldn't help it. First, if he had not jumped on Dusty, the furnace would have gone out. Then he had to explain to his master how badly Dove had done the spoon. Although he tried to sound humble, he was soon behaving perfectly naturally, standing over Mr. Lapham with his notebook in hand, reading off exactly how those spoons had been ordered. I stand by it. Listen, sometimes you just need somebody at a business who is willing to be the asshole, because that's what makes things run. And Johnny is going to be that guy, and that's just fine. Well, good.
I kind of am also a little impressed with how the book, it brings up pride when it's not just with Johnny, but when Johnny is talking to Mr. Lapham about like the Whigs and the Revolutionaries and Mr. Hancock, who's ordering this special silver bowl that will lead to Johnny's fall. But he's like asking Mr. Lapham about it, and Mr. Lapham's like, I don't know. They seem like really uppity, and God wants you to be humble, and they think that they should like rebel against an entire country. And so I found it interesting that like, the book actually doesn't agree with that part, but the book does think that Johnny should probably be more humble. So there isn't a 1-to-1, in how Forbes is treating Pride, which I think also speaks to you, Natasha, being like, yeah, this dude he's very good and he should be proud of himself.
I just I think what would have made the difference to me is if she had had at least one person who was really trying their best but just couldn't quite reach the level he was.
Sure.
And it was still, but like Dove is actively doing shit to fuck with him. At one point, it's like, oh, there's no coal left. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you wanted to know. And then when he's ordered to go get some, he brings back really low quality stuff that isn't adequate for the job. Like, I'm saying this is the kind of thing I'm like, I can't get behind. Oh, he could have been nice and then they would have been friends. Why would you want to be friends with somebody like that? He's not missing out on anything.
Yeah, like, hey, Dove, where do you think your food comes from?
You know?
How do you think of business
This isn't like
works?
I'm going to McDonald's and just not doing my job and I go home and nothing really happens to me because I leave work at work. You live in that McDonald's.
It's like if I'm out in a boat and there's a hole in it, and then as we're going down, Dove is like, I knew about the hole before, but I didn't tell you about it because you were a jerk to me once. Like, what are you doing, Dove?
So this is all building towards, there's lots of like little foreshadowings that Johnny is going to get his someday.
Well, and to drive this home, so he's John Hancock himself, I think is our first brush with a famous historical figure.
There's like a mention of Paul Revere, but we see John Hancock first.
Yeah, has ordered this special, like, ornate bowl to go with a set that Mr. Lapham had made many, many years before when he still, like, gave a shit. And so he's done all this work to, like, make the stuff match, and he's thought about it a lot, but because of the coal thing, I think, like, he doesn't have enough time to do it before the Sabbath. And Mrs. Lapham, who...
It's because he's a perfectionist.
Right.
Johnny, like, the coal thing is that day when he's finally ready to do it, but he keeps on making it and realizing it's not right. It's not right. Why doesn't this look right? And Mr. Lapham is like, no, it's fine. Just make that. But he knows
That's
it's
right.
not.
And then
so
he goes
that's
to
when he
Paul,
goes and sees
Paul
Revere.
And Paul Revere's like, nah, Mr. Lapham sucks. You're right. You got to fix it.
Yes!
You know what's up, Johnny.
See? Paul Revere knows.
And Paul Revere says, hey, anytime you have some free time, like, come silversmith for me, non-idiot, and I will pay you well for your time. So,
he's going to be the Peter Parker to Paul Revere's Tony Stark.
So Johnny's going to make this bowl, but he runs out of time, and so he has to do it on the Sabbath, which really drives home how mad he's making God, because nobody's supposed to work on the Sabbath. And
against the law in Boston at the time.
Yeah. Partly because...
Like, they have to be real weird about, like, the smoke coming out of the chimney and everything.
Yeah,
because nobody can tell you're working, or somebody's going to narc on you. Yeah, Mrs. Lapham, who intermittently seems to have her head on her shoulders, realizes that Mr. Lapham is going to let this opportunity pass them by, and so she says, okay, Johnny, you can work on the Sabbath and I'll do what I can to help you. But as a result of Dove being a jerk and Johnny not doing the normal stuff he would to tidy his workspace, because he's like very, I don't know, he's just like very into making this thing, and he's hurrying and he's worried about it, he slips up and he pours like molten silver on his hand. And
Dove goes and grabs a broken crucible, and Johnny like rushes when he sees that it's spilling all over the place, and like kind of trips and lands hand first.
He literally falls. Pride goeth before the fall. Thank you, Esther Forbes.
Yeah, and so from then on, like, what is his injury? Is that his thumb is kind of fused to the rest of his hand? That's how I read it.
Yeah, it's like it.
And
it all
his
gets
hand is like
burned
curled
together.
in.
Yeah. Just because the way the wound heals attaches all the digits kind of together in a way that renders him unable to silversmith.
And they do not see a real doctor because it was against the law to be working on the Sabbath. So he gets like some herbal treatments from a witch/midwife or something that shows up. And
apparently, like, her care was excellent, except for she didn't, like, set the hand the way that she could have, because it was going to be really painful to do it. So that's one of those moments where rereading it, I'm like, oh, that sucks so much, because she's, like, trying to save him from pain, but it could have made such a difference to his life.
Still, the worst thing about the American healthcare system is like sometimes you just gotta see a witch and you can't see a real doctor because you can't afford it and you're working on the Sabbath. Man, I hate it.
Yeah, my healthcare plan is a brujeria. I just head over to some occult shop for some herbs today.
Bathsheba's got your back on this one.
Bless her.
So then
your plan covers several scented sticks of incense, but that's about it.
And he's just kind of having a terrible time. Like, he can't do silversmithing. For a period of time, he's still living with the Laphams, bumming around town, trying to find a new job. He doesn't want to do any of those jobs.
Yeah, and the Laphams feel sorry for him for about, 3 days. And then they're like, man, why isn't this kid doing anything anymore?
He's walking around town, quote, wearing his hat at a rakish angle with his hand in his pocket. Just kind of being a dude who doesn't want to do anything. They hire a different guy named Mr. Tweedy or Tweedle.
Oh, is that so good, Mr.
That Johnny
Tweedy?
just keeps calling a squeak pig all the time.
I like when characters have names that tell you how you're supposed to feel about them.
Very Dickensian, yes, that's true.
Yeah, I actually think that this moment after his hand is injured and how he handles that is much more telling about how Esther perceived him. Because, she's getting on him about his pride while he's doing everything right and keeping this family afloat, essentially. And, I feel like that's valid. But then once he's injured, there's other stuff that he could be doing to help, and he sees it as beneath him and won't do it. So he's not, going and fetching coal or sweeping up or doing, he keeps leaving things undone and just disappearing for the day. And there's all sorts of jobs that he could take if he deigned to take them, but he won't do that.
Even the job he ends up taking with the Observer, the newspaper, he meets that kid Rab, and Rab's like, I mean, you could hang out here and do stuff. And he's like, I don't think so. I'm going to keep my options open. This seems dumb. Writing stories about lost pigs. I'll see you later, Rab. But ultimately, that's where he comes back to after a whole bunch of other stuff happens.
Because Rab's basically the only person in town who's nice to him in any way.
But can we talk about my preteen crush on Rab?
Sure.
And Johnny's preteen crush on Rab also, I think.
Yes,
it's kind
Johnny 100% is into him.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
I think more
cool.
so than Scylla. There's this framing of how he's jealous of Rab spending time with Scylla, and I think that it's more that he wants to be spending time with Rab instead of him wanting to be spending that time with Scylla. He
does think and talk about Rab a lot. He's nice to Scylla and acknowledges that he would like to marry her someday, but he's a lot more concerned with what Rab is doing.
Yeah, I think we're kind of gushing a little bit about how into Rab Johnny is, but I do also just appreciate that it's just a dude he wants to spend time with. Whether friendship or whatever it is, he's just that's a guy I want to be around and I'm invested in him. That is a cool thing to have in this book. Rab is he's always kind of aloof, and I think the only two things that get him really antsy are dancing and fighting. But it takes a lot for him to get involved in either. But when he does, he means business.
Right.
Yes.
Before we totally move on from Johnny, the aloof wanderer, Natasha, you mentioned that you really identified with Johnny. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because in this, I totally get him just feeling totally horrible after he can't do the thing he does anymore. As somebody who gets a lot of my sense of self-worth out of the work that I do, and you have a sign behind you that is dedicated to hustling. So I wondered if you had a similar reaction to that.
How dare you talk about that live on the air, sir? But yeah, I mean, that's an enormous, there's been some Tumblr posts circulating recently about how growing up as somebody who's good at things without trying, you get so much positive reinforcement, and then you get thrown out into the world in college and you're among people who are in many cases just as good as you are, and you haven't run into that before. And how we utterly fail to prepare kids after lavishing them with praise and awards and all kinds of things to like, you know, reward them for their work, we do not do that for adults. And so once we go out into the world and we're still trying even harder than we used to, we're not getting any of the reinforcement that we crave. And we have to find a way to give it to ourselves, which doesn't mean as much to us. So in summary, thank you for coming to my TED Talk about me tying my self-worth. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard to read now. And it was also hard for me to read as a kid who was extremely artistic, who like when Johnny is doing this and is making something that everybody else is saying, that's perfectly fine. Just make it, just do it. And he's like, this isn't right. And you guys aren't even good enough to understand why this isn't good enough. Oh my God, I just so understand that. There were so many things that I was involved with that people were like, that's fine. And I'm like, this is not fine. I have to do 2 more days of work on this. And I can't believe that you can't see that. And I am an extremely critical person. I was talking to Andrew about this before we started. So yeah, like relating to Johnny, like being frustrated with people not doing the bare minimum of their job and being really invested in doing well simply because he wants to make something beautiful. Like that's really all it is he wants to create something gorgeous. And will he get credit and pride and money for that? Yes. But like he could have just made it as it was. Not as beautiful. And he still could have gotten praise and money for that. And that wasn't enough for him.
Well, and some of it may even been he got Paul Revere's attention, right? And so he knows that what might look fine to a client, like people who know what they're talking about are going to see it and they're going to judge him by that. Yep. And that might like affect how like people he actually cares about the opinion of might think about him. So yeah.
Well, and
there's just such a difference between getting praise from a random and praise from somebody that you know knows what they're saying. There's just no comparison.
Right. I'll take praise from a rando. Like, don't get it twisted.
That's the best version of what Twitter's for, to be honest. But so it's interesting that you like this discussion of self-worth is really fascinating because the next big section of the book is also Johnny being like, my name is actually Johnny Light Tremain, and actually I have this cup that my dead mom gave me, and the family motto of the Light family is "Let there be light," which is really dumb. And
better than that.
There's a merchant in town named Mr. Light, and he seems like a jerk, but he has a lot of money. And maybe now that I have no other version of self-worth, I should just like bite the bullet and become part of the upper class if this guy will have me.
Well, and that also stems from something his mom told him, which is like, if you have, like I've set up this apprenticeship for you, but if you get to a point where you literally have nothing else and you can't turn to anyone else, take this cup to the lighthouse. It's not pardon my word, and show it to them. Yeah. I didn't do it on purpose.
But so that's, and then that all breaks bad because then Light accuses him of stealing the cup and they have to go to court, and he gets a crush on a lady who turns out to basically be his aunt.
We all been there, man.
Whoa.
It's a real Jon Snow situation.
But it's just kind of like that idea of like where Johnny gets his worth from, and this whole arc, the arc of him and the Lights like carries on throughout the book, because then Scylla and Izana, the 2 other Lapham girls, end up like becoming wards of the Lights.
Can we talk about the 2 of them?
Yeah.
I know that we're running long.
No, that's okay, because I just want to say, like, this idea of Johnny's self-worth and his arc of, like, is it something that I earned? Is it something that I made? Or is it something that I can, like, go and just, like, cash in later? I think the revolution, and when he becomes radicalized by Rab, or rabicalized, he kind of finds himself in the revolution, right? But but his relationship with the lights is this other like detour.
I like how you're trying to continue your sentence like that didn't happen. But okay, sure.
His status as a member of this family is a thing that he ultimately chooses to reject as part of his like self-worth. Mm-hmm. But like,
partly because they won't have him, but partly because he wants to.
Yeah, because like you want to bring up the two other girls, Natasha, because I think that is a whole other wrinkle to like what the lights do in this community and like what it is to like shift classes or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. There is like, I have serious Team Johnny tendencies.
Yeah.
But there is a moment with him and these girls. Like, it's a slow build to what's going on with the two of them, but he has this crush on Scylla that works out because they were supposed to get married. So it's a very, like, if things had worked out for him and he hadn't hurt his hand, he would have married the person that he wanted to be marrying, and it feels like she would have been happy to marry him. But there's this girl, Izana, who is the baby of the family and very delicate and extremely pretty. And loves attention and is really good at cultivating attention to get things. And like, you know, to a degree, that's just being a child. Like, that's fine, you know, but there comes a point finally where the Lavinia Light, who is like the richest woman in the community, I think, she spots Izana and decides that this is like a beautiful, charming child and I'm taking her under my wing, and Scylla can come with me if she wants, but she's going to be the lady's maid while Izana is going to be like my pet.
Yeah.
And there's a bizarre scene because I feel like I'm supposed to be on Johnny's side and I am not. Yeah. In which they're going to be going to like a masquerade ball, Lavinia and Izana. And Johnny comes over for some other reason to speak to Scylla and is directed to go into the room where they're all getting their costumes ready. And Izana is in her underclothes, a child in her underclothes getting ready to, you know, go to a ball. And he tells her to go put something on that like her father would be ashamed of her. And then slaps her.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, like we the reader, I don't think are supposed to like Izana at all, or
no,
Izzy
not at all.
as she's called by the family, because she is. You only ever see her being spoiled. Like the way you are literally introduced to her is Izana was so weakly it didn't seem worth making any plans for her maturity.
She's she's also the one of the Laphams who like it's when she's young. She's the one who's like, ew, don't touch me with your hand, Johnny. Like there are a lot of things in the book that set us up to not like Izzy. Also, we are meant to really not like the lights at this point in the book. So for the most part, we're I guess supposed to be like prepared to be on Johnny's side when he slaps what is essentially his kid sister.
Right.
But no, it's pretty bad.
It's not great. It's not great.
And I just don't understand what she was thinking with that scene. Like, how does a grown, where he's like grown in the era, like, 16 years old, slapping a child, how am I supposed to be on his side?
I mean, maybe you're not supposed to be. Like, maybe in that moment you're supposed to see a Johnny that is pushed to a breaking point, and it's a failing of his, right? Like,
well, maybe,
yeah. Like, there are a couple things going on. Like, one, he should be the one who's been invited into this family's bosom and like enjoying all of the benefits of having all their money.
That's a good point. I hadn't actually even thought of that aspect of it, but that's true.
That might be a little bit of it, and then just seeing like Izana being kind of a brat and also being distant from Scylla. Like there's a bit at the end of the book where Lavinia Light is going to go to Europe to wait out the war, basically. And they do this thing like with a puppy in a cartoon where Scylla and Lavinia Light are like, which of us do you love more? Like, come to the one that you love more and stay with us. And like, I think the only reason I can justify like Johnny in that moment is like, one, the light like family thing, and two, like him being really like he knows better than anybody how much Scylla did for that kid, and
right.
Izana is just like totally willing to leave Scylla behind, like because she likes pretty things and she likes being like a lady's little doll baby, basically.
Yeah, that scene where Izzy decides to go and like Lavinia's like, oh, she'll be an actress and everyone will love her. And I'm like, it's the late 1700s and I know that like there were star actors, but I don't think it's a reputable profession. So you're just going to steal this girl from her home and then like make her into a plaything. Cool job, Lavinia.
Was Lavinia Light the original stage mom? Like, is that what we're setting her up to be?
I think that's probably true. As we should probably keep pushing. So what about the longer Revolutionary War plot, like worked for y'all, the Harry Bluing of it all, like inserting Johnny into history in like these tiny little moments where like, of course someone did that, so why isn't it Johnny Tremain?
Mm-hmm. I feel like comparing him to Forrest Gump would be more apt, honestly.
Yeah, that's true.
Because he's like this minor character who actually was like just in the corner of the frame when every single thing happened. I did think it was interesting, especially given Esther Forbes' obvious like penchant for history and her like love of studying this period and getting things right. I think it is interesting to have the book set not from one of the like heroes of the Revolutionary War who were mostly like moneyed, educated dudes. Yeah. And instead having this like working class kid who's mostly an errand boy through it. Like the person who we're seeing the whole war through the eyes of. Like that's an interesting perspective to me, I think.
The two events that like he really takes part in, aside from like running information around, is like Sam Adams has to give this speech about the deal with the tea, and if he says one word, if he says like one set of words, then the tea party happens, and if he says another set of words, they don't. And Johnny's the one who has to hear those words and then like blow a whistle. And then also he's the one who gives the signal to the guy who gave the signal to Paul Revere, which is like, okay, yeah, someone had to do that. We have no evidence of who that was. So
why not Johnny T-Bone?
Why not my boy Johnny? Yeah, and then it's just like, here's Johnny living through this like siege of Boston where some of the English people are okay and some of them aren't, and he's dealing with this family drama.
Some of the things that I found interesting about the way that she did this was just like, and I remember not liking this as a child reading this because, you know, you hear the name Sam Adams and John Hancock and they're like these figures of almost godlike importance. And you expect them to be really remote, dignified. And Sam Adams is kind of a bastard. Like, he's a jerk to his friend who's got like a mental illness thing happening kind of in front of a crowd, not wanting to invite him to the thing and being really dismissive when he finally does speak, and speaks beautifully and captures the attention of the whole audience, which apparently Sam can't handle at all because he's a huge diva. And also he's a little bit bloodthirsty. Every time somebody's like, so maybe we could settle this, he's like, yeah, no, we're not settling this. I'm going to murder somebody.
Yeah, it's really interesting how she resists like mythologizing them, because she has this kind of famous quote, Forbes does. Most American heroes of the Revolutionary period are by now 2 men, the actual man and the romantic image. Some are even 3 men, the actual man, the image, and the debunked remains. So I think with that, you kind of get into maybe like Jefferson a little bit, or like people who like owned a lot of slaves and were really bad to all of them. But
Debunked Remains is a really good band name, actually. Yeah, somebody should do that.
Well, that's a good question, because is the remains a noun or is it a like past participle?
It's the noun, like somebody's remains.
But what if it was the like? What if Debunked was the noun. The debunked remains. Think about it, Andrew.
I don't think I'm going to think about it. I was going to say... It's interesting. You get all these super, super famous figures, but the most time you spend with them is like drinking weird kombucha up in the attic of the newspaper.
Yes.
Make my weird revolution tea, boy, and like bring it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, they're grating nutmeg and adding limes, and I'm like, this is really Brooklyn-y. But I think probably, you know what? If you took a lot of the founding fathers and just plunked them down in like a Brooklyn artisan craft cocktail bar, I bet nobody would be able to even tell.
They'd be into it.
And also, I don't know if I'm assuming that this is historically accurate, but I think it's John Hancock was having like problems with headaches. There's like frequent references to him holding his head in his hands and just like dealing with that. Mm-hmm. And there's a part where Sam Adams, his palsy is mentioned, and that gets worse when he's excited. And I didn't know about that either. So I also like details like that are not only just humanizing on this weird physical level that I don't really think about, but also remind me that, like, you know, healthcare hasn't improved.
Sure.
Yeah, like you can't find a good witch sometimes.
It's true.
That jives with some parts of the book that I don't love. Of like, this is like a world where a lot of people's qualities correspond to their physical appearance. You know, there's a lot of worth tied to physical appearance throughout the book, and there's like also Johnny's like occasional. We wouldn't be called racist at the time, but just like Johnny has thoughts on black people.
You can just say racist now, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd say that now, where he's just like, I have opinions about this woman who's not giving me what I want, and she's black, but I held my tongue for 10 seconds and then she apologized, so I'm growing as a person. Like, okay, right. Johnny. But there's plenty of other people who are like commented on in a physical manner that's meant to tell you something like bad about them. But at the same time, I think it gets to what you're saying, Natasha, where like Johnny is very observant about people physically. Like that's part of Forbes's prose, is like really rich descriptions of people at the same time. So like when she is dealing with actual people, it has this interesting, like, as you said, humanizing effect. Even if Johnny is then like...
now that you say that about like the apology that he got, and then I think it's followed up with he got to sit in Sam Adams's kitchen and his clothes were dried and he made a like networking connection. Yeah. And I'm like realizing like he's thinking, oh, I'm growing as a person. Now I know not to just go off on people because it could get me something.
Yes.
Which is really not growing as a person. No. It's just realizing how further to manipulate people.
Yeah.
Which is fine and also valid in its way.
We've read the wrong book if we want to have a conversation about whether or not altruism is real, you know? Because I don't think that lives in this book. Mm-hmm. But, Andrew, you told us before we started recording that you had a website.
I just wanted to get to that website because we had talked about how historically accurate Johnny Tremain is. I think generally it is held to be pretty historically accurate because of Forbes and the interest that she took in this period. But I Googled it just to like see if anybody had like sort of a professional or just like a list of things that were apocryphal. So I found this site, johnnytremainff.blogspot.com. It's called Johnny Tremain Fact or Fiction, all one line. There are 4 posts from March 16th to 19th, 2015. Post number 1, the book starts off with Johnny working on as apprentice the Mr. Lapham and Hancock's Wharf, which is a real place. On that day, John Hancock came to get a silver vase fixed. Johnny takes up the job and works on it, constantly works on it. Then he takes it to Paul Revere, how was a silversmith, to see how it is. Okay, second post, just titled Johnny Tremain Setting. The setting of Johnny Tremain is in Boston around the early 1770s before the American Revolution, with some parts of the story in Hancock's Wharf. End of post. Third post, titled Characters. Some of the characters in Johnny Tremain are true, for example, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Paul Revere. Some of the characters are fake, though, Johnny, Scylla, Isaiah, Dove, Dusty, and Mr. Lapham. And then pictures of Paul Revere and Samuel Adams and links to their Wikipedia pages. And then the crowning achievement just titled Overall Historical Account, which is really, I think, the core of what we want to talk about. Johnny Tremain's historical account is pretty good. The technology is about where it was in the early 1770s. Muskets, cannons, silversmiths were in business, and candles. The places... Wait, what? Yeah, and candles. The places in the book were also accurate: Boston, Hancock's Wharf, and Bunker Hill. The people were somewhat accurate. They had Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, etc., but mostly the characters were fake. And that's the end of the... So, in conclusion, Johnny Tremain's historical account is pretty good.
Thank you for that assessment.
That's
Johnny
what I found
Tremain FF.
on johnnytremainff.blogspot.com. Chrome is
like,
telling me that the connection to the site is not secure, so be careful.
Oh, imagine that.
It's like a deep fishing operation.
I really was. That was not what I was expecting when you said that you found a blog and wanted to talk about it. It should have been. I should have known that there was going to be another Who Was Phone situation.
Muskets, cannons, silversmiths were in business, and candles is probably the best.
We're in business. I love it. Muskets TM.
Mm-hmm.
Muskets TM.
All right, so, God, I feel like we've talked about everything in such a circuitous fashion that it's really hard for me to get a grip on what we need to finish with here.
Yeah, because like a lot of it is just like it's a little bit slice of lifey. Like you see Johnny like learning to ride this horse goblin. You see Johnny sort of realizing that he's good at other stuff and like recovering a sense of self-worth by like submerging himself in this political situation in Boston that he just like did not pay attention to at all before. And then it's partly just like he is our window into the events of the Revolutionary War, which happened mostly like you'd expect. Like you do get a little bit of Johnny when he's talking about that guy, the deserter whose name is Pumpkin, which makes it a little. I feel like it undercuts the
gravity of the situation.
But he sees this deserter who helped him named Pumpkin get like shot, just like executed. And he sees like Rab is in the Battle of Lexington, I think, and gets shot. And Johnny sees him one more time. Johnny spends like the last quarter of the book just worried about Rab having gone off to war and whether he's like alive or dead. But just talks to Rab and kind of becomes a man. Like there's a little exchange toward the end. Where he says...
is this before or after Rab has like sent him away so that Rab...
This is around... Okay, how... someone's asking... I think it's that Mrs. Bessie, that maid of the lights who he's in with. She asks him, how old are you, Johnny? 16. And what's that? A boy or a man? He laughed. A boy in time of peace and a man in time of war, which stuck with me a good line. Bit, but,
yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Natasha. I have a tiny bone to pick. Did anyone else at the end? So he finds Rab, and he has a sad moment with Rab. And he's talking to, I guess, Dr. Warren, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor's like, hey, could I just like see your hand for a second? And he's like, why? What about it? He's like, I think it's just some scar tissue. If I cut it, you'd be fine. Like, I found that unsatisfying from Johnny suffered this injury that changed his view of himself and then became himself despite it was a thing I was really on board with. And then the doctor's like, what if snip, snip, and you maybe you can't make silver again, but I'm going to give you your hand back and you can shoot a gun. Like, I guess that's supposed to be heartwarming, but I think it felt too easy. Do folks disagree?
I don't disagree in principle, but I feel like for a kid's book, it's predictable.
Yeah, that was part of it. I felt like I was like, oh, you're going to do that? He doesn't just like go on to be himself? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was I didn't think it needed to happen, but I did think it was an interesting choice to have it happen like right at the very end of the book, where if it had happened any closer to the actual event, he would have just gone back to being a silversmith and there would have been no book. Like, I think it's like he dedicates himself to this cause, even though he knows he can't like directly participate in it. And then he like gets a sort of pass where then he can, like, now that he understands it and has like given himself fully to it, even though he has seen like the horrors of it, now he can like go and be part of it. Like, that's how I saw it, I guess.
And I also like that, you know, it's a little bit of a break in pride for him too, because he wouldn't even let the doctor look at it before.
Yeah, he does reject it like earlier.
Right, yeah, like the doctor asks him if it's something he'd had since birth, and he lies and says yes, because he's so ashamed of it at that point.
Okay, if we tie it back to like Johnny vis-a-vis pride and shame and things like that, that makes more sense. That he's like, his acceptance of it is more important than like it as an actual thing that has happened to him. Okay,
because they kind of even stop bringing it up as a plot point.
They do,
like,
they do
toward the end. Like he just like he learns to write, he learns to ride, he learns to do pretty much everything he needs to do, and he stops thinking about it. Yeah. Hey, Craig, sometimes books have themes.
Yeah,
have you heard of themes?
Not all of them do. Sometimes stuff just happens in an order, and then you're done.
It's like a good note to end any given podcast on.
Yeah.
Natasha, did you have any like closing thoughts? Anything that you wanted to hit that we didn't get to?
Let me look. Oh, I had forgotten the part. Something that I really like, because we were talking about Mrs. Bessie, the cook, and like head housemaid of the lights. And she has this like inside knowledge that they're going to jump the Light family once they get to their country house. What happened to Andrew? He disappeared.
I'm still here.
Andrew, come back.
He's here.
Oh, your picture's gone for me.
Oh, no. That's the best part.
She keeps it under her hat until it's time to actually like make the attack, and then she tells them just before the angry mob gets to their house. And I like that there's Johnny liked the old woman all the better that in the end she had been unable to see a considerate master whom she had served for 30 years, a young woman whom she had taken care of since she was a baby, humiliated, tossed about, torn by a mob. Sam Adams might respect her the less for this weakness. Johnny respected her the more. There are like a few moments like that in this book that I like, where it's really unclear what the right thing is to do.
Yeah.
In terms of like, what's the right thing as a human being, and what's the right thing for the rebellion, and what's the right thing for just like common sense and being smart about things. And she's careful to not conflate them all as being the same thing, which I think is an admirable approach.
Yeah, and as we said, I think as you said at the beginning of the show, like not all of the British characters are just like heinous monsters. Like one of them seems like a pretty normal guy who is in love with Madge, and like they hug a lot, and like hopefully it all works out.
She
like,
sits on his lap even though he's very small.
Yeah, it's like all
and
right.
He calls her his suet pudding, which is
Ew, what?
Listen, no man ever better call me his toothsome suet pudding. There will be hell to pay.
Yeah, so that kind of gray, the gray aspects of the book are pretty remarkable for how like it is still a light book. It is still a lighter read for a younger audience, and it still accomplishes that stuff. Cool. I had fun with Johnny Tremain.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I had never had occasion to read it. I don't know if I just like the curriculum that I was assigned just never had it in there anywhere, but
yeah,
I had somehow missed it, and I'm happy to have unmissed it.
Well said, sir.
Yeah. Words are hard. We've been talking for a while.
This wasn't a like curriculum book. Somebody just gave it to me, and I read it. But I'm glad to come back to it because it's been so long that it was like there was hardly anything familiar about it anymore. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me on this.
Thanks for having us.
It was super
great.
fun. Yeah.
Do y'all want to do some plugs before we?
Oh, what are our plugs,
off?
Andrew?
Craig, plug. I think just our show, and it's
What?
It's various accounts.
Overdue. Facebook.com/OverduePod. Twitter.com/OverduePod. www.overduepodcast.com. That's
Those
it.
are the ones. Every week we read a book that one of us hasn't read before, and we talk about it. And usually it goes okay.
And you guys are doing for I think it's not just patrons only, because you post it on your regular feed too, the Stop Homer Time.
Yeah,
Y'all
stop
are
Homer
still
Time.
doing that, right?
Show within a show. Patrons get it early, but everybody else gets it too. Where we're reading Emily Wilson's new or newish now translation. I guess new in the terms of like
The Odyssey.
the scale
What the
of the
Odyssey
Odyssey
is, yeah.
But Emily Wilson's translation of it, which is really, really excellent. It's the first full translation of the work by a woman into at least into English. Yeah. And we're having a lot of fun with both her translation specifically and just generally with the goofy things that happen in that book. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've read the Odyssey, and listening to y'all's interpretations of some of it really puts into perspective. Because, you just sort of take things for granted because it's a myth and whatever, but when you say it in a certain way, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of shady, huh?
Well, and it is fun because we don't normally go through books at that granular of a pace.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it is a little bit of a departure from the regular show because we're both reading all of it, and we are going like 2 books at a time. So we're getting a little bit more detailed and picking apart individual parts of the verse or individual scenes, which is also kind of beneficial to how the Odyssey is structured. So.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate you two for coming, and everybody who's in the audience. Thank you for coming too and chatting with us.
thanks for joining us.
Watching, guys.
Thanks to Andrew for posting a hand emoji and saying that's Johnny's hand.
It was symbolic of a hand.
I'll end it with my catchphrase. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.